one of the stories called Culture. I'm not going to read it all, it's just from the middle. What happens at the start is that a Swansea poet goes to a poetry reading and for circumstances beyond his control, he's a bit of a drinker, he can't get a drink at the venue he goes to, and his wife has warned him before he goes out, because it's his habit to drink too much at poetry readings, to watch his step when he gets back in. But the irony of the story lies in the fact that he hasn't been able to get the drink he wanted, and when he gets home he's perfectly sober. She still doesn't believe it. So between the poetry and the pool and the lack of alcohol, he walked home in a state of deep depression. His wife was kneeling on the floor listening to classic FM when he got back. Her last words to him before he'd gone out had been, "Don't drink too much." So he stood there, steady as a rock, eager to show her how sober he was. But she didn't look up. The floor around her was strewn with still wet paintings, and there was a peculiar smell of burning in the air. Perkins sniffed a couple of times, but it wasn't the stove, the oven, or the fire, which had long since gone out. His wife had been busy. She was wearing an old painting shirt, and there was paint on her hands and in her hair. The paintings were wild and whirling abstracts, and the music on the ghetto blaster was loud and soul-stirringly familiar. Rachmaninoff's first piano concerto, Perkins said, with perfect enunciation, with Alfred Brendel on piano, if I'm not mistaken. He knew, as he said it, it was a mistake, but he wanted to prove he was still articulate and in full control of his faculties. She groaned and shook her head. "Must you always do that?" she said. "Do what?" Perkins said. "Give me the title and composer of every bit of music that ever comes on." "Do I?" he said. "Yes, you do," she said. "Can't you just listen and enjoy it for what it is, without this constant compulsion to show off your superior knowledge? It makes me sick. I can't watch a film or a play without you giving me the complete cast list, right down to the assistant gaffer and tea boy. Why do you have to do it all the time? Were you like that when you were a kid, always showing off?" Perkins had never said boo to a goose when he was a kid, but she didn't give him a chance to say so. "I can just see you and your family sitting round the radio listening to music," she went on. "That's Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto, Mummy." "No, it isn't, son, that's Beethoven." "I'm sure you're both wrong, my dear, it's definitely Mozart." "For Christ's sake, just enjoy the music for what it is." It was just a hunch before, but Perkins now got the distinct impression she wasn't glad to see him. "Sorry, love," he said. "You're quite right. I'm always doing that. It won't happen again." His placatory tone threw her. "Are you drunk?" she said, looking at him for the first time. "I wish I was," Perkins said. "What's that smell?" "Sage," she said. "I've been smudging." "Smudging? What's that?" Perkins said, imagining it was some new graphic technique she'd developed while he'd been out. But it was nothing to do with art. "It's something the Native Americans used to do," she said. "They used to burn sage in every room. They reckoned it cleared the air, cleaned out all the bad energy. I lit some just after you went out tonight." "Smells like herbal cigarettes," Perkins said. How does it work? Do you go around smudging the ash on everything?" "No, it's just the smoke," she said. "You burn it in something and carry it round from room to room. It clears away all the negative energy." "I could have done with some sage tonight," he said, and started to tell her about the reading, but she hated readings even more than O.T. did, and cut him short in mid-sentence. "What about the paintings?" she said. "You haven't said anything about the paintings. Am I improving?" He looked at them more closely, from all angles, but couldn't make anything out. She hadn't painted for ages, and they weren't like her usual stuff. These were wilder and more abstract. She'd used up a hell of a lot of paint on them, all of it applied in an apparent frenzy. Then he said, what he always said about her work when he was momentarily in two minds. Brilliant. She looked quietly relieved. And you can tell what I'm trying to say? Of course. What? He hesitated. The truth dawned on her. You don't really like them, do you? She said. Of course I do, he said. But don't start getting too intellectual, that's all. It'll kill everything. What do you mean intellectual? She said. You were the intellectual. You could tell he was getting out of his depth. He didn't know why he'd said intellectual. Maybe because of the lack of anything immediately recognizable in the work. What I mean is, he said, picking his way across the sudden minefield, paint what you feel, not what you think you should feel. Don't force the imagery. She looked at him searchingly. He knew that look. There was very bad energy welling up behind it. Are you sure you haven't been drinking? She said. God's honour, he said. But she wasn't convinced. She got up from the floor and advanced on him. Let me smell your breath. He backed away instinctively, although he had absolutely nothing to hide, and as he did so, something stuck to his foot. He tried to kick it off before she noticed, but it stayed stuck. And then, when she was almost upon him, as though by divine providence, a familiar chord struck up on the radio. He should have ignored it, but Schumann's first piano concerto, he blurted out before he could stop himself. That was definitely the last straw. She went to bed not long after that, convinced he was drunk and not worth talking to.